Yesterday, we began to look at the church of Pergamum in chapter 2 of the book of Revelation. And we're looking at what Jesus considers important, what Jesus says is important to him. And that's such a wonderful topic to me because it doesn't matter what I consider important. It matters what he considers important. I often get distracted, sidetracked, looking at things and elevating things of relatively minor importance to the place that are paramount. And so it's always refreshing to come back and see what is it that the Lord himself says is important in our lives and in our churches and in how we ought to be living for him. What's important to Jesus? We've already seen that the love for him is important in the church of Ephesus. Faithfulness is important at the church of Smyrna. As we look at this church of Pergamum, we haven't gotten to what is important to him yet, but we have seen some things he's talked about. He's telling this church he's thankful they're faithful, even in the face of persecution and martyrdom in the case of one individual. He also has told them that there is some satanic involvement here. So Satan is very busy in this city, and that has filtered into the church to at least some degree, and they've stood against that. And he is grateful and thankful for that. But he does say in verse 14, he has some things against them. They have, for whatever reason, allowed some in their church, or at least infiltrating their church to some degree, who hold the teachings of Balaam. Now, Balaam was an Old Testament prophet who it seems that he was almost like he was one of God's true prophets. It's only as the story unfolds that we find he is a false prophet. And when he could not curse the people of Israel for Balak, the king of Moab, he didn't totally back off. God wouldn't let him curse Israel, but he apparently went to Balak and said, look, God refuses to let me curse them, but here's how you can destroy them. You can cause them to compromise with sin. And so we find in verse 14 that he taught them to eat things sacrificed to idols and acts of immorality. So idolatry and immorality. They began at that point to get involved with women, especially in Moab, ungodly women, to fornicate with them, to be immoral with them. That compromised their morals, and then that led to the idolatry. They began to worship their deities as well. So that's what happened in the Old Testament. And so he is saying that you're allowing such type of people in your church to hang around. I don't think he's saying that the whole church has bought into these sinful teachings. That would bring up a whole different set of condemnations. But they're allowing people to hang in there in their church that are teaching false things, immoral things perhaps, compromising on morality. In the next verse, he says you also led some there who hold to the teachings of the Nicolaitans, which we're not really sure exactly what their problems were, but they're mentioned twice in chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation as a group of people that have false teaching. So they're allowing these people to infiltrate their body to some degree, and they're not removing them. They're allowing them there. So what should the church do in that relationship, in that involvement? What he says here in verse 16, therefore repent. That seems to be in every church situation where he has a correction to give them. He tells them to repent 8 times in these messages. He tells them to repent. And he says, if you do not, I'm going to come to you quickly. I'll make war with them with the sword of my mouth. Remember the sharp two-edged sword coming from his mouth in verse 12. I'm going to speak a word. My word is going to make war against these false teachers, and I will make war against them. He's not saying that he's going to make war against the church, but against those false teachers that have infiltrated the church. Then he says, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. A repetitive message he gives to each of these churches. Listen to what I say. If you have an ear, listen up. And to him who overcomes, to him I will give some of the hidden manna. I will give him a white stone and a new name written on the stone, which no one knows but he who receives it. He He is saying here that I'm going to reward you with a number of things, but especially look at this passage where it says, I'll give you a new name written on the stone, a special name that no one knows but the one who receives it, and of course, God himself. What a special reward. What's important to Jesus as far as this church is concerned? His word is going forth. He is correcting them concerning compromise with false teachers. What's important to Jesus is purity. Purity and separation from false teachings, false doctrines. Sometimes we let that go. We say, as long as we're living decent lives, who cares what we believe? But Jesus cares about what we believe, and what we believe ultimately will determine what we become. And so it is important to Jesus that we live pure lives, separated from false teachers. And he makes that clear to the church at Pergamum.